today. There can be more detailed discussion between you and all of you and the my team. So that way, many of the things will be clear, more and more clear. More examples can be cited, more discussions can be encouraged. And I would like to request all of you to take part in the discussion, because this will be noted, and I will also be there in the class. It's not that I will not be there. I'll also be there. I know how they're going, and do respond. Do take part in the discussions. And as you know, this time it's ongoing assessment. There will be probably no mid-sem and no end-sem. So all these tutorials and the assignments that you will be getting and the kind of discussion that you have, everything will be noted. So keep that in mind and accordingly participate and be present and participate. That is something that I have to tell you. That said, today we will complete this particular segment of social motivations, psychology, whatever we call it. I have named the slide as Social Psychology of Bilingualism. That sounds fancy, but basically what we mean here is that the motivations, the overall background, the cultural, social-cultural background and the atmosphere, the behavior, the motivations, all kinds of things, the positives and the negatives of the entire environment that makes people bilingual, or that makes societies bilingual. Why do some people become bilingual? Why do people stay bilingual sometimes? Why do sometimes people do not? What are the factors? So there are, it is easier said than done. Like when we say that we can explain it away, it's not so easy to explain, and there are a number of models, number of theories proposed. It's a it's a rather complicated area to trade on. But anyway, a BTEC course, so for the benefit of this, I have tried to make it as simple as possible. That's it. I have only four, 4, and then slightly I have tried to give some more. But the TAs will take up more nuanced discussion once the tutorial starts. So I think this is what we did. We talk about this, or we stopped here yesterday? Anybody who was there present in the class? Did we stop here? Social psychology, the first slide. Where we, yes, where we talked about bilingualism was not always considered a positive thing. In fact, in the when you always go to the that is how norm is. So in the Western, and because they still do control the whole world to a large extent. So our theories and values, everything are borrowed from there. So the Western ideology about Western theory about bilingualism was there was a lot of negativity to attach to it because of the scriptures and the way they look at and communities through scriptures and so on. And then of course the world changed, and the dynamics between different countries, different groups within the countries and so on changed, and as a result of which there was a lot of the bilingualism became a norm. And simultaneously, of course, research, the academia also had a lot to do with it. Gradually there were changes in findings on language and bilingualism, which was largely carried out by psychologists and not linguists. And the findings were to do with the finding that bilinguals are somehow lacking in certain qualities, and that typically happened because of in fact there is a lot of research in that domain. Maybe we can discuss it later if we have time. The initial study started with school children in England and many other places in US, where some children were found to be dropping out, school dropouts, early school dropouts, and why is it happening? And it was found that some people were, those children are typically from the working class and so on. And by and this finding was that those children are typically bilingual, so they have a different language in their home, and this actually brings to light the idea about closed system in society versus open system of society, and how, what are the languages spoken. To make matters simple, basically those people who were not doing well in the education, in the school system, were the children of typically migrants and other such people who were
And
bilingual.
slides are
So
not.
no, slides are not moving because I am just giving you a background. I am not moving them at all. So this is not there in the slide. I'm just discussing it. I'm telling you about the history. And then because these children were lacking in their academic credentials, they could not cope up, as we call them. They could not cope up. They couldn't match up with their other peers. And then this kind of findings typically had to do with people, children who were also bilingual at the same time. And that is how the stigma of being a bilingual also was reinforced by research to some extent at that time. And then of course this went on for a long time, and this is how things were till the till psychology as a discipline had more developments, more different kinds of approach and more objective instruments being used and so on. And later on it was found that actually there might be proof the other way around and so on. So this kind of things are always there. So why I'm telling you all this history and stories is that there is always more than what meets the ear in this, in our case, not eyes, in meets the ear in our case. Like society, the languages that you speak, the languages that are around you, the kind of people that speak those languages and so on, play a lot of important. They do play a very important role. So I've tried to put them into different categories, but as I said in the beginning, these are not segmentable in such a clear manner. There is a lot of give and take between these, but nevertheless. So first and foremost is the social context, the influence of social context on bilingualism. Why do people become bilingual or remain bilingual? What is the social force behind it is what matters. How does it matter? For example, what is even considered a bilingual? Start with the very first basic question: who is a bilingual? So, if I speak a good variety, the standard variety of Assamese, and I also speak the let's say the one is called Boronagaria variety of Assamese, will I be considered a bilingual? Probably not, because Boronagaria is not even considered a very good equal variety of standard Assamese and so on. So there are all these contexts, there's all these value judgments that are attached to uh, the very idea of bilingualism in the first place. So a person speaking in Spanish and English is considered bilingual, but may not be that when it comes to standard English and Ebonics. Ebonics is an African American variety. So African American variety of English with a low prestige. Similarly, maybe if you speak American English as well as Indian English in America, you may not be considered a bilingual. You also speak the Indian part of kind of it, that kind of thing. So this a lot depends on social consensus, the social consensus of the place where you are, the time and place of those happenings, the society you belong to at that given point. That is what decides. A lot of research these days also show that the kind of people you maybe you are actually in conversation with also makes you do things differently and so on. So this is where it all boils down to the value system, the judgments that you actually carry in your head due to the social pressure, the prestige factor, the hierarchy, and so on. Another point is that bilingualism, how do you become a bilingual, is not just by an input-output system, for example. Language is not just that kind of a, devoid of like, yeah, when you speak in a language, you are part of a large network of systems that also has various kinds of things like gestures, intonations, gauges. So the way your body, why do we see some, I don't know whether you find it funny, but I certainly find it funny. And people like many people like our in our generation who have refused to remain young, um, in mind, find many of the news readers very funny. Their intonations are very funny. Their gestures are very funny. Why do we find them funny? Because it somehow doesn't go, what we expect, it doesn't go with them. We have grown up at a time when news readers were somber people. They come and their job was to just read the news. They were not creating it. But these days that's not the case. I mean, news readers are everything. Yeah, they're experts on everything. And of course, apart from that factor, the intonation, the unnecessary, unnecessary addition of us everywhere. So a sentence like, another point in this regard is that bilingualism is not ability to use. Let's say if it is read by a newsreader, it will be another point. It goes like this. Why is it like this? Because it is not that she is. It's not involuntary. This is a voluntary thing that she is doing. She or he is doing. It's more about she than he. That is again another social impact. So what happens is that you are trying to imbibe a certain kind of system that probably you think is making you appear more in tune with the latest uh, fad, whatever, linguistic fad. So these kind of things are always there in the background. The social context of bilingualism is one very important aspect. Secondly is the identity factor. Of course, we will take this up in each of them later on. So identity is another very, very crucial marker when it comes to use of language. So bilingualism is part of, in-group by out-group kind of thing. So if you are, depends on whether the in-group is more prestigious or being considered part of the out-group is more prestigious and so on, will decide how you, whether you remain a bilingual or how you look at bilingualism per se. For example, the stereotypes here will be very, very, very crucial. So how the society, for example, in a minority group, minority in, it can be considered an out group. Let's say in case of American scenario, for example. So the Asians will be an out group. So they speak a language different from the majority in group, which is the English speaking Americans. I won't use the Native Americans because the natives are an out group now. So the white Americans are the in group, and the others, Asians and other people from other places, the immigrants are out group. So as a result of this, Hispanics again are very large group, but still out group. Bilingualism was considered a deficit because the Hispanics will not be using language English the way the in group uses, and because they are socially less powerful, less important. So that is why bilingualism was considered kind of a deficient thing about that has to be despised. Like Mexicans in US are viewed as low status group, and consequently their language and also their bilingualism. So the whole, it's a package. It's a entire thing is a package, a stereotyped package, so to say. However, the reverse is seen in cases where the outgroup is seen as superior. For example, French English bilingual. So in the same American scenario, a French English bilingual might be seen as something like an exotic person, a sophisticated person, a more knowledgeable, more educated, more whatever. You just fill in the adjectives. If it is a person who also speaks French, but if you also speak Swahili, if you also speak Spanish, it may not be the same case. So the kind of identity factor that has to do with the speakers of that second language is also a very, very important thing to consider. Another thing again is the assimilation and acculturation forces. These are, remember, political forces. This political force. So assimilation and acculturation here, another thing is important to mention, the language policies of different countries. A lot of Western European countries and, for example, have a single language formula. You have to speak the language of that particular country. So it is Italian in Italy, German in Germany, French in France, and so on. So that is seen as a marker of an identity. So even the French has a department for language purity, a ministry for language purity, and so on. So everybody is supposed to learn and speak French, not only in the formal and outside home scenario, but also mothers are supposed to speak in. The immigrant mothers are also expected to use French with their children in order to acculturate them further. There was this, I had this, the government declaration somewhere, I have to find it out, but it is there. So how the French government actually has an order for immigrants, for migrant people who have come into France. Similarly, you have this particular example that I have quoted from Clinton's 1999 this thing declaration, sort of. So they say that you have, even if US is a melting pot, but you have to have merge all the racial and ethnic and linguistic differences and create the great American, contribute to the great American dream, so that it becomes an American identity rather than Chinese or Indian or Mexican or whatever. And this particular quote tells you what it all ultimately boils down to. Our new immigrants must be part of our one America. This idea of one America or one France or one whatever is basically telling you how the country, how that country's constitution looks at the language issue. So by using only one language as the official language, they are trying to use it as a unifying factor, national identity. So the national identity of the French is French. It's not inside the country. You may have different varieties of people and the culture and language and so on, but you must be a French as long as you want to be a French citizen. That is basically what the whole idea is. So language as a unifying factor in the nationalistic sense and so on. So we have a responsibility to make them welcome here. So immigrants are welcome, and they have a responsibility to enter the mainstream of American life. So all these are basically, innuendos, are basically roundabout ways of saying that you better learn English if you want to be seen as an American. Now contrast this with other countries. For example, in Canada, in India, we have multilingual policies. So we don't, it's simply not possible to impose one language on the entire country. It might look like India is, well, India is vast and varied. America is not so varied. Actually, America is also varied. The very fact that that has been put under the carpet is the very success of one language policies that they have. So this worked fine for most European migrants. So the initial migrants were from Italy, from other, Ireland, this and that countries. So they were mostly European. So they did not have problem assimilating, and acculturation forces were worked on them very differently as opposed to other migrants, because they were all white. So they quickly became part of the in group. So there was no problem of, because they were in group, because they were the powerful group, they controlled everything, finance and administration and academia and everything. So there was no need for bilingualism in that kind of a scenario. However, when other immigrants like Mexicans, Chinese, Asians in general, and others, and later on from the Middle East, lots of people came in, they could not assimilate because of their phenotype, because they looked different, because they are different. And India, however much they try, however much they dye their hair blue, black, red, pink, whatever, will still stand out as an Indian. A Chinese will stand out as a Chinese. A Mexican will stand out as a Mexican. So that phenotype makes the difference, they make them stand out. And that is why they're open to discrimination in some sense. If you want to discriminate, you do. You can. And this in turn makes them continue using their own language as some kind of a method to get more social support, to fall back on your own community as a support system. Because however much you speak, however quickly you change your accent, your English accent, you will still be an Indian, you will still remain an Indian. So that necessitates, to some extent, bilingualism in these communities, which is why the difference. So Italians may not maintain the Italian language, the Irish may not retain their Irish, but certain other communities do retain, and that is why they continue to be bilingual in spite of being, second generation, third generation migrants. So these are various kinds of forces. And then, of course, because of these forces, you have attitudes both of the in group and the out group. So as I said, these are all interconnected interconnected notions, though we try to give them different names, but they are interconnected. So because of the forces, because of the socio-political, cultural forces that are present in a particular society, that gives rise to attitudes and ideologies, let's say. Ideologies of, what is an identity factor, why you should be identifying with your language and culture more, why you should not, or whatever. So attitudes, what is attitude? Attitudes are evaluations that can be positive or negative, and that can come from both within and from outside. So for example, I'll give you a very small example here from a long time back. I was in Jharkhand for during my master's. So I was in Jharkhand, and I was working on a couple of languages from Jharkhand. So one was Santali, one was another language called Orao, Uruk, and a local language, which is actually a lingua franca, and now it is called a language, proper language, Sadri, which is basically a variety of Hindi to some extent. So these three languages I was working on, and I was going around collecting language data from various groups from both urban and rural population. And the stark difference between among those people about the attitudes towards their own language and culture was very, very revealing. That was the time when Jharkhand came into being. The state was carved out of Bihar, and there were lots of political movements, lots of political undercurrent in the society that was present. So I was interviewing these college kids from a particular important college there, Xavier Institute of whatever social studies something, in Ranchi. So there were the students who were from Kurukh community. Kurukh is a so-called tribal language, indigenous language that belongs to Dravidian language family. And 90% of the times when I was asking them, apart from collecting the language data, I was also collecting the socio cultural data from them as to whether language maintenance is possible or this language is gradually going towards a shift as vis-a-vis other languages in that particular region. And the attitude between the Kurukh and the Santali were so different that ultimately resulted in Santali being recognized as one of the. I think by now it is probably a part of the its schedule. I'm not sure. Linguistic students can tell me. But that was the time when this was all was going on. So the Kurukh speakers typically were trying to negate that they are actually Kurukh speakers. Everybody were like, no, I don't speak it anymore. I speak only Hindi. So my mother tongue is Hindi. So we start with asking, what is your mother tongue? What is your first language? What is the language that you speak at home? Young college students, like your age, in the age group as you all are, 18 to 20 kind of group, almost everybody denied speaking the language, even though the moment I turned my head and they will be talking in Kurukh among themselves. But they did not want to own up. Now, this case was entirely overturned when I was meeting Santali people. Santalis were extremely proud of their culture, extremely, they were very, what do you say, they were sticking to the identity factor, and they say that we are proud of our culture. This is actually one of the scholars of Santali language, who was a PhD from Texas. He was there, one of the big figures among them, very, very well-respected scholar. So he took me to his home, and the first room in his house was full of the musical instruments that the Santalis play. So everything was there. It was a very typical Santali house, and there was no pretense of trying to be seen as a sophisticated, so-called within quotes, sophisticated foreign returned scholar sort of thing. And then he told me that I just, and he was dressed like a Santali. He was not trying to appear like a US returned sort of thing. So then he said, see, we are different. We Santalis are proud, and you see, there will be a day when we will make it, in the constitution. This language will become, and the political counterpart also was very active. So this is what we mean by attitude. So attitude both from within and from outside. The outside thing is that Santali, Kurukh, these are all tribal languages. The name that has been given, that is a legacy, colonial legacy. They are called tribal language. As a result of which, the group itself is not very comfortable owning up to it. They don't want that tag anymore. So we are Hindi speakers, and that is exactly where. But then this, in the long run, decides how you will be seen, how much power you can actually take for yourself, and how much power you let go of. So similar things happen in every other society. This is the personal experience I wanted to share, but this is there in every society, every country. Differs depending on the power structure of the society. So in Scandinavia, for example, proficiency in two languages is encouraged. Scandinavian countries are, they are in close contact with each other, and so on, for various kinds of social as well as financial and trade relations. As a result, it is encouraged. So a lot of people speak 2 or 3 languages, and it is considered a positive thing. But in Canada, as you know, that English and French both are officially they have equal status, but there is a lot of tension. Similar tension is also there in Belgium, for example. So there are all these attitude things and political undercurrents with all this attached, that makes a lot of difference whether bilingualism will be understood as a positive thing or negative thing. So Kuruk Hindi bilingualism is not considered a very good thing. However, Santali Hindi bilingualism is okay. That kind of a thing. So in US again, a person with French accent is seen as a sophisticated one, but someone with Asian accent probably no. So even as I said, this is true even for how the group itself sees. So ultimately, these all various kinds of undercurrents, various kinds of social forces, push and pull of various kinds of social forces, ultimately boils down to certain identifiable, visible markers in the society. So basically, first and foremost is the power and economy of language, what is called habitus by in literature. It is called habitus. So habitus is basically the power, but the power where language can take you. This was not coined in with respect to language. It was coined in terms of other factors by Godel. But basically, it all matters boils down to what kind of social, cultural, and economic power your language or others' language give you. So, does it mean that does English mean power? Yes, it does, certainly. Does Kuruk mean power? No. That is as simple as that. So it all ultimately boils down. So which community will remain a bilingual? Which community probably will gradually shift to one language, that is the power language of power. The second language is ultimately a matter of what it gives it, what it gives to the community. Economy of language, the language of language of opportunity, language of education, language and of so many other things, social mobility, upward mobility, and so on. So as a result of all these background things, the community has a choice in terms of these things. So the choice with respect to identifying with the social psychological values. What do we mean? This is a very loaded term, the socio-psychological value of a particular language. So now, when you say that I am a Hindi speaker or I am a Tamil speaker or a Bangla speaker or whatever, the kind of identity, if you want to identify with this particular language, you also immediately put yourself within the socio-psychological baggage, the norms, the cultural norms that the particular language group practices. So in the sense that what it means to be a Tamil speaker, immediately you have what is called in cognitive linguistics, it's called a frame. So the moment you you identify yourself as a Tamil speaker, alongside you also speak a bit of Malayalam and you also speak English and so on, but you are identifying yourself with a gamut of things that are part of what we call a Tamil culture, Tamilness, if I can use that term, being Tamil. So that is what that is a particular thing that is of importance in this kind of a choice, the kind of choice you exercise. So a person may want to identify with one particular social norm at a given point, and within the same day, you might want to identify with another kind of social norm by identifying with another language. So bilinguals, what happens, they switch. When you are a fluid bilingual, you have the power to switch between languages, and it is not always a matter of necessity. So it's not like you are talking with a Tamil person, so you switch back to Tamil or something else. It is not always like that. It is also to identify with the larger social reality, norms, cultural practices, everything that the community stands for. That is one aspect of switching between languages, or the choice of identifying. So when we talk about identity and language as an identity marker, this is one particular aspect of that identity marker that the speaker chooses from. Whether you want to identify, sometimes even when, let's say, there is a lot of debate going on about certain kinds of social practices of a particular community, you belong to that community. However, you do not take part. You choose to stick to English language while discussing this, and thereby distancing yourself from that. This is a flag, that, well, I'm not part of you. I'm not, I don't really agree. So if you don't want to agree with your community, often, with the things that the people are arguing about, you want to distance yourself from those. Typically, you will also switch your language. This is something that you see around all the time, but you don't always notice. So if you are not, if you are not too much what we call ego investment. So if you are not too ego invested in certain kind of thing, you would try to choose to shift to another language to show that I am not, and such kind of things. Again, another important aspect of choice that bilinguals practice, whether identifying with this group, that group, being bilingual and whatever, is also the pragmatic gaps. What do you mean by pragmatic? Excuse me. By pragmatic gap has to do with, sometimes all of us have dealt with this, sometimes certain ideas, certain things are not very easily it's not easy to express those ideas in a particular language. This is what we mean by pragmatic gap. Certain things, certain ideas, certain values, certain ideological positions are better expressed in one language than the other. So that is a very pragmatic, simple, and day-to-day thing that we all deal with, and as a result of which we choose to either identify with one group or identify with another group. That is pragmatic gap. This is something that all of us have been part of at one given point or the other. Sometimes it is also called a lexical gap. Lexical gap, as in the pragmatic gap, also sometimes is a lexical gap, in terms that some of the ideas are not do not have a readily available lexical entity in your language. So, for example, as I said, Utkhanan is a word that exists in Hindi. This word, of course, I encountered some years back. I did not know this existed, but this exists. But this is something in a wider audience outside of UP, for example. If you use this word outside of UP, I'm sure many people will not be familiar with this. So if you go to Delhi, for example, for a job interview, and you were talking about archaeology, and then you were using this kind of word, it's very difficult. So in order to reach a wider audience, in order to reach a wider population, to express your views to a diverse group, you need to switch to English language in this particular case. So excavation is something that all of us are familiar with. Utkhanan is not. So similarly, many other things. So this is called a lexical gap. Of course, the word exists, but in some cases they may not even exist. I'm not sure if computer has a Hindi counterpart. Any Hindi speaker? I mean, there are many Hindi speakers. One of you, please volunteer. Is there a Hindi? I think it is Sanganak.
Yes, ma'am.
It's Sanganak, right? But nobody uses it. Does anybody use it? Sanganak, yes. See, my Hindi is not that bad. Sanganak. Yesterday I was looking, and then this idea struck me that this is something that I had not noticed. Sinkai. Yeah, I think this is how it is written. What does it mean? I forgot to look up the English counterpart. So this kind
Sinkai, I think, yeah, it's section.
section.
I think it's, yeah, Sinkai.
Oh.
Ma'am, it's faculty. Ma'am, faculty is called Sinkai.
Yeah. It's something related.
Like faculty
Correct.
of arts is called Kala Sinkai.
Yeah.
Okay, marvelous. Thank you so much, Amit and Shanu. Actually, I used to congratulate myself after learning each of these words one at a time. So I was very happy when I learned the Varisht Abhyanta, which is senior engineer, right? So the point here is that Varisht Abhyanta is engineer or officer? I'm still no, engineer. Officer is engineer. Yes, officer is adhikarik. So not so bad. But the thing is that even though Hindi language has these words because it has gone through what we call a status and corpus planning. So these things we will discuss in the next class probably. Status and corpus planning has to do with when you experts sit down and decide that okay, fine, now this language has become an state official language, so it needs the lexicon, it needs the words for all the official purposes and education purposes and so on. So you create words. Hindi has undergone that many years back, and that is why we have all these words. And they are perfectly fine, and they are used everywhere. In UP, you go to any department official, everything is in Hindi. So initially, in initial phases, you might find it difficult, but you get used to it. But outside that, it is very difficult. So that is what we mean by lexical gap. So even if it does exist, but it is still not widely used, you might shift. And this is a very pragmatic thing. Then the third point is the symbolic value. Even if there is no pragmatic gap, even if there is no, you are not trying to identify with some kind of a cultural value, social value or whatever, sometimes simply for the sake of symbolic value. Symbolic value again has to do with, you have to go back to habitus, the idea of habitus. Why do we choose to sometimes use English? Mothers, I'll give one example. Well, I cannot help it. I mean, maybe some of you might judge me, but this is probably, I cannot help because I'm a linguist in the day. So whenever I visit, like if you go to those malls, nowadays people go to mall as a evening engagement. Earlier people used to go to temples. In between temple and mall, I don't know where they went, but now it is mall. So parents will take their toddlers, and the mothers typically will be there. Fathers probably don't have time often. So mothers with their kids is a very interesting thing to see in certain places. Airport is one of my favorite. Mall is another of my favorite. So you will see the mothers who will be probably speaking in Gujarati or Hindi or any other Indian language at home. The moment they enter the mall, it's all English. It's like, and even trying to put on an accent with the English so that the children know that this is the scenario where you have to use English rather than any other language. And sometimes there is a code switching. So idhar nahi jana, don't go there. Both sentences will be, they will flow one after another. Koi zarurat nahi hai. I mean, you can just use one. But this happens. So this is called a symbolic value attached to choice of language for a bilingual. What you use, where you use, and with whom you use. Yes.
Isn't this an example of diglossia?
No. It's not an example of diglossia because you don't have any official pressure to use English in a mall or in an airport. This is similar to how you dress to go. Yeah, see, whether you go by whether you take a flight to reach from point A to point B, or you take a train to reach from point A to point B, ultimately you are just going from one place to another, right? But have you noticed how people dress differently for different kinds of journeys? It is something like that. Language is another thing that we, that we carry as a sort of an attire in more abstract terms. So you use English more rather than Hindi more, or in Bangla more. Bangla is a different case. Tamils and Bengali is a different case study altogether, but others, more often than not, this is the case. So this is what we mean by symbolic value. Symbolic value, of course, you can find in many other places. You want to, you want to appear more this or that, something like this. Identity again is, of course, oops, I did something wrong. Identity is again intertwined with values, sometimes with political identity, sometimes with various other kinds of, you want to be seen as part of one particular group, this in-group, out-group kind of network. For example, identity also holds for various kinds of smaller networks, money. In IIT Guwahati, for example, or maybe it is across all IITs, or it's just the age group that this has to do with. I don't have the data from all over the country or all other IITs. But IIT Guwahati, I know the people use a particular kind of lingo. There is a particular kind of a group of a sort of set of lexicon that is common to all the kids, that as long as they are here, they use. And probably they continue using it for some more years if they stick to the same group. And later on, they kind of get rid of it. They mature into a more different language. That is something that is very common. So this is an identity factor. So even if you, so the moment you see your buddy from IIT Guwahati in a corporate event in Bangalore, let's say, you immediately switch back, with that language. That immediately gives you that bonding sort of feeling that we are part of one group. So that is also part of identity. It's not always a larger political, socio-cultural thing. It also has to do with smaller networks, smaller groups, and identities. We do it all the time, often involuntarily. You see two people walking on the streets, and suddenly, or even in a group, suddenly they will fall back on another language or another lingo just to identify with to signal certain kind of identity among them, between them, and whatever. So this is another very, very important factor. These are the way I am talking about this in very simplistic terms. They are not as simplistic. I will try and get my TAs to give you more data on this, a little bit more of explanation. But I would, or maybe simultaneously, all of you can also just look around, see these things a bit, look up these things a little bit. And then, of course, power and solidarity. So power and solidarity also are intrinsically related to all these factors. Power and solidarity is has to do with like it's a dynamic thing. The same people might, with the same group, same speakers might slip back to different language to signal solidarity or to signal some kind of a power. So, for example, again, I'm giving an example of mother with their kids. Often what happens, you see these days, these days, because I am noticing these days, things, what happens, parents will chastise the child for doing something wrong. Sometimes they have dirtied their dresses or whatever, they have gone somewhere they shouldn't have gone, and so on. So the scolding starts in Hindi, and then gradually, as she tries to get more and more authoritarian, more and more, you must obey me kind of feeling when you want to give. And also there is something called distancing. That is called an objective versus subjective take on that particular scenario. Then you switch back to another language. So there is this kind of a distancing factor. For example, don't lie to your mother versus don't lie to me. So same thing in case of, you can signal in terms of language as well. So as long as you are talking in the mother tongue to the child, there is some amount of solidarity you are practicing. But then you switch to English, and then you say, okay, you dare not talk to me like this. So I'm quoting this. I heard this somewhere. So this is when the mother says, your mother is distancing herself from the kid, not only in terms of emotional distance, but also by bringing in a language that is not of the home. That is an imposition of more power over the hapless little kid. This is common across, this is present in many, many scenarios. I'm giving a very simple example, but this happens in every other scenario as well. So the power and solidarity, whether you want to signal your hierarchical status in terms of power, or whether you want to show solidarity with the group, the other outgroup, in-group, whatever, language, again, choice of language is again very, very crucial there. So these are, as I said, easier said than done. Whether you want to show power as the basis of a relationship, basically this is what ultimately boils down to. Do you want to show that the relationship between the speaker and the hearer is that of a power equation, or is it that of solidarity? When you want to take yourself away a bit, you use English. In Indian scenario, it is English, or it can be something else in other scenarios, so on and so forth. So there are many more, far more nuanced things into this. But I guess for this course, this much should be enough. I might ask my TAs to give you a little bit some theoretical aspects as well, or let's see how it goes. But a little bit more of examples with more and more data and some research papers is what they will discuss with you, right? So this segment, from tomorrow late, I don't know, but I haven't really planned it out, but Wednesday next week will be the tutorial week as of now, and there will be 2 of my TAs. Actually, tell me how to break the group down. 96, I think, last I checked. So 30 plus in each group. So I would like 3 groups. That will be easy. But how to break the group, I don't know. Tell me how to go about it. I'm sorry, I'm having a bad throat. Tomorrow, maybe I will just introduce another small idea into this module. However, already we have covered a lot. Maybe code switching and code mixing I will discuss tomorrow, so that it's kind of taken care of, most of the things. But yeah, one of you please volunteer, the BTech students, how to make the groups. Can one of you volunteer to do that and let me know? And accordingly, I will add my senior PhD students into this group so that they can take up the tutorials. let me know how to. Yes, Garvit. I know only couple of you by name now. Others should also speak up. Anybody would like to? If say it is either way, either you volunteer or I just randomly choose somebody.
How many TAs are there in our course?
Well, there are many, because this course is such a way designed in such a way. There will be there are, see, I am approaching the concept of bilingualism from various perspectives. So the first module, as I said, is a social perspective. Second module will be cognitive linguistic perspective, and the third will be entirely devoted to experimental work. So there will be different different people taking care of different aspects. So for example, there are 3 students already in this, they're attending this class, and they have their own backgrounds, experiences and so on. So they will be taking tutorials maybe towards the end sometime, or one or two of them might take. So I haven't decided who will do what, but there are many who will assist me, because this is a very, very large group and a varied course. This course is not one one track kind of a course. There are so many different things, and everybody, my students are, they have expertise in different areas, not in one. So accordingly I will distribute, but you decide how to break it down. 30 के group में 30 plus के हिसाब से you take 5 minutes. We have time. In the meantime, let me, Amit, you there?
Yes,
Are
ma'am.
you? I need to talk to you maybe sometime today afternoon, 3. Are you free? 3 o'clock?
Yeah, 3 to till 4 I'm free. Yeah, 3 to 4 I'm free. After 4 I have a class.
Okay. Okay, great. So 3, maybe 3:15 will be good.
Sure. Yeah, I'm free.
ठीक है. So we'll have a Teams meeting at 3:15 then.
Okay, ma'am. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Okay, have you decided? Okay, then I will find somebody from the group to help me with this. Let me just randomly pick somebody. Chelsea, are you there?
Yes, ma'am.
You pick up another volunteer and divide the class into 3 groups, and then let me know how different teams group for that.
Ma'am,
Because
can you?
tutorials will be simultaneous.
Okay. So, ma'am, can you give me the number? Maybe we'll discuss and create groups on WhatsApp, and then.
You have we have this Outlook group now, 135, HS 135.
Yes, ma'am.
So you can, there you see all the members are there. You can see the members.
Okay.
Excuse
Then
me,
you can. Yes.
ma'am. I think you can post links to 3 groups in the main group so that people can join the groups accordingly as per their interest.
नहीं, interest का कुछ difference interest नहीं है इसमें. I mean, there is this. See, the topics that have been discussed already will be discussed in further detail. Like some papers will be discussed. So everything will be same. There are simultaneous groups. So let's say on Wednesday, 2 TAs will discuss similar things in 2 different groups, so that there is no disparity. Like that. So इसमें interest वाली बात नहीं है. I mean, this is just the division is only in terms of managing the number, because they will not be able to manage 96 people in one group. That is why. Otherwise, कुछ नहीं है. There is no other motivating factor here. So it can be, you can take your friends along or whatever. I mean, because you have joined the course as groups. So एक ने लिखा मेल, सबने वही मेल को कॉपी पेस्ट किया. तो 10-10 करके तो ऐसे ही आ गए. तो उसी तरह से you can create your groups, है ना? Or whatever factor is exciting for you. That you just, and HS 135 group is accessible to all of you. I have sent a welcome mail and something else also I have sent. So you can see all. Accordingly, you just make the group and you have time till this weekend. After that, I have to talk to them and create the thing. So accordingly, you can do. आप time ले लो, अपना अभी करना नहीं है.
Ma'am, 3 people can separately make groups of 30, 30, 30.
हाँ,
and then make the TAU assign